Welcome to Together, a higher ed podcast where we bring you stories, insights, and experiences from voices across the higher education sector. I'm Chase Haygood, the Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Utah. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Dr. Lyon Cotti, the Associate Director at the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah. Welcome to the podcast, Morgan.
Thanks for having me.
We're really glad that you're here, taking some time out, no doubt of any number of busy things happening over at Hinckley and here at the U. To get started, for our listeners and our viewers, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your journey in higher ed, your role and previous roles at the University of Utah, and specifically with Hinckley.
Yeah. So my story with higher ed and for experiential learning is the same. I was an undergrad here at the university a little bit of a minute ago, and I actually did a Hinckley internship.
Awesome.
I was, what history tells us, the plurality of our students, most of them have worked for Orrin Hatch in some capacity.
Love that.
Of the nearly 1,000 students that have done internships at Hinckley over the last 60 years, I think if you were to rank all the offices, the number one is Orrin Hatch because he served in the Senate for 4 decades and had campaigns and all the things. I was one of those many students, and my story is what I tell students is that internship led to grad school, which led to my next job, which led to grad school again, the networks, the experiences, and eventually it led me back to Hinckley, where I get to be evangelical about this and try to help other students have the same types of amazing experiences I had.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to put a pin for a second in the very distinguished and, as you suggest, really long, wonderful career of Senator Hatch and how your path intersected there, and if you can unpack a little bit of that for folks. We're going to circle back to that in a second. Can you talk a little bit about the role that Hinckley plays at the U in terms of opportunities for experiential, so for faculty or staff here at the U or students who might be watching or listening? What do those opportunities look like? How does one get involved with Hinckley?
Yeah. So Hinckley really has a two-pronged mission. And one is that civic engagement, community-facing one, and the other is that student experience, the internships, the classes, those things. So the community-facing one is that we put on forums. We bring elected officials. We have pathways and programs to encourage people to register to vote, to do all those things. That's been a core part of Hinckley since we were founded in 1965. Right along with that, since our very first year, we've been placing students in internships. And that is what draws so many students to Hinckley. They know how important internships are. They look fun. They look like it's amazing to go to DC, to work at the Utah State Legislature, to work for a local nonprofit. And so Hinckley is that conduit. Because we've had so many students do amazing jobs in the past, we have an amazing network that we use to place students in these experiences.
I love it. And I mean, seeing the Hinckley Center, making my way through, as I arrived at the University of Utah, I was like looking to say, okay, there has to be there it is. That's the unit that's doing lion's share of the work when it comes to engagement, seeing students match up and do that direct engagement, and then speakers on campus as well, right? From across partisan divide, political spectrum, any number of folks who have served the public make their way to the University of Utah and share a bit of their journey right through Hinckley.
Yeah, and it is amazing. Sometimes we'll have alumni come back who are now experts in their fields or who are elected officials themselves. But we really try to get a broad spectrum of speakers to speak about maybe it's about the election, maybe it's about water policy, or we had someone just come in and talk about the Peace Corps and the pathways students can do that. Sometimes it's more about career paths. So we really try to give a really nice, again, just broad spectrum so students and the community can learn about the issues and find ways to get more involved.
That's awesome. So I'm going to back up to where we put the pin in.
Okay.
One, I want to thank you and all the folks in Hinckley for the tremendous work that you do to make those connections for students, because we know, you all know because you're leading on it, and the rest of us know either through research or from watching it or perhaps having benefited from it ourselves, really the stickiness and the drive towards greater retention, greater completion for students, getting them engaged, getting them involved, creates that not only a sense of belonging, but a sense of purpose and a sense of connectedness to this is the purpose and the drive or I see what that person's doing. I see their values. I see their vision. I want to be a part of that. And as they're a student at the University of Utah, it's like mutually beneficial in like, no doubt, multiple different avenues or down multiple different paths. So I'm interested, if you're willing to share with us a little, from your own journey, like what drew you into this kind of work, right? Because as we talk about perspectives and we talk about the multiple different kinds of stories, tell us a little bit, if you're willing, about your story. What drew you into higher ed? What drew you into this particular kind of work?
Yeah. Well, there were two things, and that's why it's just so fortuitous that I've ended up at Hinckley. I've always loved education, and I've always loved politics and history. And in fact, this morning, my 9th grader asked me, I was trying to ask him his favorite genre of reading, of literature, because he's having to do all these different things for his English class. And he turned the question back on me, and I was like, oh, historical fiction. And it's been that way since I was in 6th grade. So I've always loved learning about this stuff. I was raised in a family where we didn't just talk about politics around the dinner table. My mother ran for office, my grandfather ran for office. We were really politically engaged. So I knew I loved history and politics, and I'd always thought about teaching. And when I probably was in elementary, I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. And then I wanted to be in 9th grade, and then I got to college, and I was like, no, I think I want to be a professor. So it has just worked out really well that there is this amazing place where I can use all these different things about my interests. I'm passionate about politics. I'm passionate about engagement. If you talk to people about their favorite thing about college, usually what they tell you, if you dive down, it's like where they found their people. And Hinckley, I think, is like where I found those amazing people that I wanted to surround myself with. I should also say Chi Omega, because I still have friends from there too, but those were the two places on campus where I found my people. And so I think that's why I'm so passionate about it, and why my coworkers are as well. All of them did internships wherever they went to college. They love this, and so it makes it easy to push the mission of the Hinckley Institute forward when we care about it, and when we landed back where we're surrounded by our people who care about this kind of stuff.
Well, I'm really grateful to you for sharing that kind of part of your journey. I think one of the unique things about understanding and taking time to listen to other people's stories is that we begin to see the individuality, right? The journey of individual people through higher education really is part of the transformative impact that we want to be able to have, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just about the social mobility. It's not just about liberal education, small L, like seeing things that you've never seen before about yourself or about the world. But part of it really is about lives that are changed because of the experiences and the people that they find along the way.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there were any number of like individual people that said to you, so you got, I think you said grandmother, maybe
grandfather and mother.
Grandfather and mother.
Members of the Utah State Legislature.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you and them for their service.
Yeah. You should thank me. I canvassed a lot of houses. I walked up and down those hills of my neighborhood.
Sure. How old were you at the time?
Oh, what were the years? Like 6 to 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was little.
I mean, that's formative.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Right? I mean, you're out knocking doors saying like, hey, will you vote for or consider voting for?
I think I could still give you the little speech that I said when I knocked on doors.
I'm not going to press you on it. Yeah. But if it rings a bell and you're kind of like, yeah, this is kind of what it sounded like. I mean, those kinds of experience, the more I chat with folks, which I absolutely love the kind of individual storytelling because of the aforementioned, I think that's where a lot of the power sits. And I think we've got to take more time to be able to have those kind of conversations. It's one of the reasons for this podcast. But part of it too is like, were there moments as you were out canvassing or as you arrived at the University of Utah that somebody identified in you that you already had that passion and you saw that passion in others? Are there moments like that for you when you got here that you look back in retrospect and you're like, yeah, that affirmed or confirmed the decision of, I really like history, I really like politics, I really like engagement, public service.
Yeah.
Were there those kind of moments for you?
Yeah, and there are two individuals that I will highlight, but I also want to bring up like the larger picture is, in addition to growing up in this family where I developed these passions, my mom had this group of just sort of high power, highly intelligent, career working moms. And I've had so many people come up to me and be like, where in Davis County were you raised? So I had all of these examples growing up. But the two individuals at the university were Professor Dan Jones and now President Mike Benson.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan Jones is just a storied professor and pollster in Utah. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but everyone said you have to take Dan Jones's Intro to American Politics class, and I did. And he pulled me aside once, and he said, was it your goal to get the high score in the midterm? And I said, no. He said, well, you got it. And him taking that time to let me know, I know you worked hard and you succeeded.
Yeah.
That was big time for me.
Sure.
And then I had a class from then Professor Mike Benson, who was the assistant to the president at the time here at the U.
Mm-hmm.
Great class on the American presidency. And I was sort of thinking about getting a graduate degree. I was just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And he actually told me, he was like, you have to aim high. He wanted me to apply for the Marshall. He wanted me to do all these different things. And at the time, life circumstances, it didn't really afford going to Europe for grad school. But he encouraged me to aim higher and to think about better graduate programs and those sorts of things. So those were just two people that I'll forever be grateful for that really did impact me, make me think I've got this and I can aim really high. The other, I know this is a really long answer, but a lot of times when we talk about the network you build, and I know for some students applying for an internship can be intimidating, especially if you don't feel like you're really connected. But the network that's been most important to me in my career was the fellow students. It wasn't the manager, it wasn't the senator, it wasn't, the chief of staff, some high-profile person. They were great examples, and I'm grateful that I got to learn from them. But it was my fellow student or my fellow interns, and then when I started working, the young people in my office, we're who we've relied on as we've started and then now entering sort of mid-career of relying on each other of how are you handling this? What are you doing? What promotions are you up for? How can I help you? Yeah. That network of fellow interns and other college friends who also have helped me navigate how to be a working mom, how to do all these things. Those have been the most important networks in my career.
So I love, and that was not a long answer. It was a great answer.
Oh, thank you.
Great response. I think, how do we empower more folks, more students to engage in that kind of way, right? Because, anytime you pick up the Chronicle of Higher Ed or you pick up almost any kind of part of industry trade right now, it becomes either we're dwelling on everybody's overworked, or the other narrative, it seems, is my perspective. The other narrative is we're all failing all of our students all the time.
Yeah.
And from where I sit, people are working really hard, but almost all of those folks are really passionate about their work and are going to keep going.
Yeah.
And the inverse of that other narrative, and maybe it's just that I see glasses kind of like brimming with like opportunity, but part of that is like, we're not failing all of our students. The people that I see, faculty, staff, all kinds of folks, care very deeply, and they're relying at, a moment of challenge as a society, and we've got questions about return on investment, we've got questions about all sorts of things, it seems. But people care really deeply, and they're calling on that deep well of commitment to then say, no, I'm going to serve students.
Yeah.
And even the student-to-student connection and trying to create more of that. I'm wondering, from your own experience and the work that you do in Hinckley right now, front lines, working with students as well as the other kind of pathway mission of Hinckley, trying to think through, how do we do more of it? Like if you were to spend some time, and I know that you do, thinking about how do we get more students to understand the power of an internship, the power of their peer, sitting right beside them inside a class or, in a study pod or whatever over in Marriott. How do we do more of that?
Yeah. This is a conversation. I've now been at Hinckley 10 plus years, and this is a conversation we've been having the whole time.
No doubt. Yeah.
And I know was existing long before I got to Hinckley as well. And our take on it, what we are usually looking for is how do we remove boundaries? And that can be financial. So how are we finding more funding for our students? How are we finding more scholarships? How are we making going to DC more affordable? How are we doing global and even a local internship? Because that's time away from a job they might be doing. How are we making these more affordable? And even sometimes with even the application, I think we used to have 2 letters of recommendation and one had to be from a professor. And at some point we thought, why? Like, why do we have to do that?
Yeah.
So even that can be a boundary for a student, especially now. If you're a freshman in huge classes or online classes, you don't have a relationship with a professor. So looking through those things, and as we're doing that, not being territorial, working with the Career Success Center. They've changed their names too many times in the last 10 years. I try to remember which it is. Working with other departments. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes it can be hard when you see something, you're like, I thought we were doing that. But if we're all rising the tide, right?
Yep.
And the idea that if we're all helping students, then who cares who's doing it? Let's just figure out ways to work together to remove those barriers.
Yep.
And also, if we need to be providing more resources, we're doing more at Hinckley on interview training, resume, skill building, those types of things than we've ever done, because the new research is entering freshmen have not had, are less likely to have a job, any type of job than ever before.
Right.
I used to be able to rely on some sort of skill set. You interviewed at the Gap.
Yep.
Or you were a nanny, or students are coming in not having done any of that.
Yep.
So we have to recognize, well, if we want to serve those students, if we want that student to do an internship, we've got to provide more resources. And it's not a ton of work. I know you said we're really busy, but doing an interview training once or twice a semester, it's not that much.
Right.
And the dividends are huge.
I was going to say, it contributes to the overall kind of trajectory of a whole cohort of students who could be applying. I would just, side note, I did put in my time at the Gap denim wall. I know how to fold.
You know how to fold.
I know how to fold.
Okay.
I mean, fold it with the best of them.
Okay.
So our ability to take that skill set, I love the way that you put it, and then help students transfer those skills into what could come next, and then well beyond that after they complete their degree and they move on beyond the University of Utah.
Well, and it does so much more than just impact students. So one of our new programs is the Youth Service Corps. And this really started because a member of the community was telling President Randall, we don't have enough interns, we don't have enough AmeriCorps members, our nonprofits are hurting. And so the Youth Service Corps is aimed at providing more student interns at nonprofits, and we're linked with AmeriCorps. So we have all these benefits. Students are getting professional experience, they're getting more funding, and President Randall and a generous donor have committed more funds, so they're getting more than the AmeriCorps standard. But we're also sort of inserting ourselves, and so, I mean, AmeriCorps, there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Yep.
And we sort of have inserted ourselves to make it so, hey, don't worry about the big, scary paperwork that you're going to have to do.
Yep.
Let's just get you started, and then we're going to train you and help you along. And, I mean, the very first semester, we had almost 50 student interns in the community working for nonprofits who really needed the help. So it's not just students that we're helping. It's the entire community.
Yep. Talk about social impact.
Yeah.
I mean, it's leveraging the flagship, this university, this great university, to then say, can we be doing more? And then very quickly getting in order to figure out the how.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I mean, it's really, really
It's been amazing.
Excuse me. It's really, really great work, right? I mean, when you see the transformation happening right in front of your eyes as you think through, okay, if we were to stop doing that and start doing this, more students, plus the community members, and it just kind of ripples outward.
And students from a broader number of majors than I've ever seen, because they saw, oh, wait, there's money attached to this. There's a scholarship. There's pay.
Yep.
So I'm going to apply. So I have biomedical engineering students working for charter schools that never would have been interested in that type of internship before. And I recently re-interviewed everybody and asked, especially those students, does this feel like it's totally separate, or do you still feel like you're skill building? And every single one of them said, this is complementary. I'm getting professional skills. I'm getting communication skills. I'm loving it.
I can't thank you enough. I mean,
well, you're so nice, but also it's so easy when just amazing students are engaged and want to be part of this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Again, part of that, I guess, that second narrative running about, the woes of higher ed and we're not serving students. I mean, again, I look around. I'm fortunate to know people like you, and hundreds of other folks here at this university, and then hundreds of thousands of folks across American higher ed. It's like that narrative just doesn't hold true. It doesn't hold up against the weight of all the really good things that are happening. And I don't know if it's part of my own personal mission at this point, but it's to begin to kind of turn the page on that, to say some of that may be true and we need to do hard work to correct it. But also there's some really, truly amazing things happening.
Yeah. And it is our responsibility to let the community know that. I think I don't like to just brush away the idea that people don't trust institutions anymore. There's so much data. There's something behind that. We've got to listen to that. And, the Hinckley Institute, other amazing parts of campus, Benyon, the work that you all do is really practical. So I think maybe we have a different lens of like, what do you mean we're not we're so practical. We're so geared towards careers and professionalism, but we've got to listen to those concerns, see where that's coming from, and do a better job communicating our value.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think the key to that from my perspective is like the listening piece. Like listening to what the concern is and maybe even what's behind the concern.
Yeah.
So this is what we're saying. Well, what's driving even more of it from behind it? And some of them could be really, really hard conversations. We got great folks that are engaged in that, both here within the state and nationally as well. And I think it really is all of our part, though, or all of our kind of role to be kind of critical listeners. We want students to have those skill sets. We should demonstrate it as well, and then be responsive, right? I want to circle back precisely onto your experience with Senator Hatch and with that group of folks, and knowing that we now have the Orrin Hatch Center in D.C. You want to talk a little bit about that? I'd welcome it. I was there, I think, at one of the opening ceremony kind of pieces, which was just amazing, and the opportunities that are there. I'll let you talk about it, but I'm so excited about it, and knowing that you were going to be here today is kind of like, in the Orrin Hatch Center, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So experience on staff as intern, and then what opportunities look like for students in DC now.
So I was a DC Hinckley intern in the fall of 1999.
Awesome.
And it was amazing. And I worked for Senator Hatch. And I mean, speaking of that network, I had a classmate who said, when you're interviewing with Hatch's office, tell them you're really interested in the Supreme Court, and they'll put you on the Judiciary Committee, which is where like the cool work gets done. And so I did that, and I got a judiciary placement.
Nice.
And I mean, you're still an intern, you're still doing the grunt work, but you got to meet so many interesting people. Working in DC is still one of my favorite cities on the planet. And at the time, for many years, actually a couple decades, students lived in Alexandria, Virginia. And it was, at the time, I think the last metro stop in Alexandria, the Van Dorn Metro. And we even lived like almost a mile from the stop. And so it took a minute to commute in.
Yeah.
And once you were out of DC, you were in the burbs and not having, that DC urban experience. And so we moved students into DC, I think in the early 2000s, and we've rented at 2 different places, I believe. But we were always constrained by that number of beds in the apartments, and we would talk, do we need another apartment, but just for the summer? And just realizing, I think some of our woes could be solved if we had our own property. And if you walk around DC, you notice things like the University of Arizona and Penn and the UC system. Some of these larger institutions have their own places in DC. And it's either a spot maybe it's a small office and a conference room. Sometimes it's a full dorm. And so under the direction of our director, Jason Perry, and our managing director for DC, Gina Shipley, they started looking for properties and found an amazing property right off DuPont Circle. It's 2 row houses that have been sort of poorly combined to create office space that's now beautifully combined in a dorm that sleeps 50 students.
Yeah.
And it's just so central. Some of our students are walking to work. The others are on a very short metro ride. It's an incredibly safe neighborhood. And the students, rather than being separated in these apartments scattered throughout a big apartment complex, They're all there together. We have, it's more that dorm style with the added benefit of being in a ridiculously beautiful, historic, renovated home.
Yeah. No, the first time I walked through the front door, I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah. Well, especially that first floor we kept really beautiful because it has a beautiful conference room, and that's going to be more for meetings and President Randall or if other university leaders are in town. But it has this spiral staircase that goes up all 5 floors that there were some that just said, hey, logistically, this isn't going to work. We have to get rid of it. And thankfully, wiser heads prevailed and found a way to preserve the beauty of it while still keeping each floor and all of our students secure and safe.
Yeah. No, it is amazing. So I just want to encourage, I'm sure that there may be a number of folks that drop by after I say this, but University of Utah folks in DC, in the metro, know that we are present.
Yeah.
Drop by, say hello.
Yeah.
I'm sure folks would welcome them for a quick minute and look around, and then, knowing that we're there. I mean, it's just, I'll be in DC in January for the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, and I plan to drop by and just say hi to folks and see how students are doing. And I mean, it's amazing.
It is amazing, and it's so fun. People will be in D.C., and I'll just get a picture of the building because we do have a U flag hanging out the front, and you can see we've got a plaque, the Orrin Hatch Center. It's named in honor of Orrin Hatch and the foundation that helped us achieve those goals. And then next to that is the Hinckley Institute of Politics. So a lot of times it's someone who is a U alum, did a Hinckley internship, and they'll talk about, it was the Oakwood Apartments, but we lovingly call them the Roachwood Apartments. So they'll remember those days, and we did bond over those times, but I'm glad these students get to bond over this beautiful home.
Other things.
Yes.
Other things.
Yes.
I love that. I really, really am grateful for all the work that you do, Morgan, and just teams of people inside Hinckley who are committed to the notion of greater public service for the greater good, both here in Utah and throughout the country and around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about, you grew up in a political family. My grandfather was politically active in the rural South, and I can remember a photo of me and all the grandkids, which the grandkids I'm detecting a theme. The grandkids typically get pulled out onto the campaign trail. Mm-hmm. There were 6 of us, and so we all sat for a photo, and that has become a treasured kind of photo in our family of 6 grandkids who were rooting for their grandfather to become a county commissioner.
Yep.
He didn't win that election, but the notion of serving those around you, I think, stuck with all of us.
Yeah, we similarly have this treasured photo of my younger sister who was probably, 4 or 5 at the time. I'm trying to remember how old she looks in this photo, but my mom is being sworn in, and my little sister is just sitting at the chair at her desk on the floor of the Utah State Legislature. So, I have 4 other siblings that seem to have been wise enough to find careers in different fields, but somehow this one drew me in.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll come back around. You never know.
They're all still, we still talk politics. We still are all really engaged. They just found a way to not get sucked into the politics.
Yeah. Do it in other ways.
Yes.
Do it in other ways. Morgan, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking some time today. Thanks for all the work that you and others are doing. We're grateful for Hinckley. I'll stop by the Orrin Hatch Center around January 21st, 22nd, a couple days after the inauguration. I'll be in D.C.
Very nice.
We ask everyone a final question, so I'd love to ask it to you now.
Okay.
And that is, how do we go about, from your perspective, all the work that you've done, you've seen, you've experienced here at the U and beyond, how do we go about creating lasting, transformative change, and how do we go about doing it together?
I think this is actually still on the theme of the conversation we've been having of just speaking and listening. Mm-hmm. And whether that's, in our office, we call them the hallway conversations. So many challenges at Hinckley get solved by us just standing in the hallway and figuring things out. Talking with our college partners, moving those things forward. But this is also something I'm talking with my students right now. We're teaching a campaign management class, and I think some students are realizing how entrenched they are in their social bubbles and their social media bubbles, and realizing, I'm not going to convince anybody if I'm just talking to people who agree with me. Yeah. So just continuing to have those conversations, and this is just so cliche, but not to convince, but to learn. And that is how, as just to be a human, how we move things ahead, and hopefully we're improving things along the way.
Well, I appreciate that in a number of different ways, because I hear, and tell me if I got it wrong, but what I hear in that is the notion that we're listening to learn, not so much listening to debate or to counter, that we're not leaning towards, okay, how am I going to come back at what you've just said to convince you that you're wrong and I'm right.
Yeah.
And that in doing so, perhaps, I've described it of late, and I'm wondering if this resonates with you at all, but the ability of good leadership seems to be not just getting people to the table to hear each other, but doing it in a way that keeps perhaps disagreeing parties or parties who have perhaps, again, conflicting values or interests, but keeping them at the table long enough to find what we do have in common, and that whatever change we're looking to make, that it can be accomplished together.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually was thinking, I know a history professor starts here. He's told me he starts one of his first classes of the semester with a lesson on active listening because he just wants students to understand this basic human skill. And when we talk, I know there's this line people like to say, if we can disagree about your favorite donut, we can't disagree about maybe this central core element of politics or government.
Right.
But I brought that up with my class the other day, and one of my students who's actually from South Africa came up, and he was telling me things he learned that Nelson Mandela did with the people who literally imprisoned him. This country's dealt with really, really, really hard things in the past, and they did it by compromising with people that you may despise what they say.
Yeah.
But you've got to find a way to move the conversation forward, and it's hard and it's controversial.
Yeah.
But we have to keep talking to each other.
Yeah, as you say that, I'm reminded, I think it was Senator Moynihan who had the famous line about, you're entitled to your own opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts. And our ability to get to a space where we can say, this is in fact true. Yeah. This is factual. What we think we should do with that truth, we might differ on. But I really I love the way that you described that. Our ability to look back into our past and say, we've dealt with some of these issues. We say, around higher education even, we have dealt with some of these issues before.
Yeah.
We can deal with them again. The outcome might look a little different. But that really is the privilege and the opportunity of leadership today, to engage in that, seeking or building consensus or building coalitions to move us forward.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Morgan. Really, really good time together. I appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
Taking the time. And thank you all for joining us today for Together, a Higher Ed podcast. We ask you to join us again next time.